Hades is a near-perfect game for so many reasons. The art, the music, the storyline, the gameplay, there's really nothing to improve upon. You can even easily play for 100 hours without encountering a single bug, or so you thought. Hades actually has several bugs and glitches in the game as of today, more than 2 years after the full launch. The studio spent a long time patching the game to squash as many bugs as possible, but nevertheless, some slipped through the cracks. Today we'll be going over the most interesting and usable glitches that can still be seen in Hades. Beware, there will be major spoilers about the game ahead. This one is just some goofy fun you can have in Skelly's room, and I want it to be the first bug we show since anyone could do it really quickly if you wanted to. You may need to bind your cast button to something a little more mashable, like left trigger, to do this. First you choose the aspect of Hera, then you can load your cast before you shoot, and then you shoot Skelly, then you quickly swap to any other weapon, and then back to Hera as fast as possible to refresh your cast and get your Bloodstones back. Then you load up and shoot again. All it does is load Skelly up with a bunch of Bloodstones, but it's kind of fun to see, and it's interesting to see all the Bloodstones on the ground afterward too. This is really only usable because you are able to swap aspects in Skelly's room, and thus has no real application outside of it. If you've seen some speedruns of classic games like Metroid Prime, you might be aware that in many games it's possible to get out of bounds and skip over certain areas. This is actually abused heavily in one of Supergiant's previous games, Transistor. Now Hades definitely does not have anything nearly as useful, but it does have at least one little oddity. When you use the aspect of Achilles, you can throw your spear and rush to where it landed by hitting the special button again. If you throw the spear into an out of bounds area, then dash across what we call a void space, or a space where you cannot normally stand, then interrupt your dash by trying to rush to the spear in the middle of the dash, you will wind up standing right in the middle of that void. If you start moving around afterward, the game will simply push you back to a walkable tile. Once again, this bug doesn't have any real use as a player, but I promise that the next ones definitely do. Alright, before we move on, I just wanted to ask you if you've seen anything weird in the game, bugs that you think that you've encountered, please let me know in the comments below. I'd love to investigate and see what else we can find. Alright, so this is probably where we get to the meat of the video because we have a lot to discuss when it comes to the most broken aspect in the game, Beowulf. So Beowulf was added during early access with the blood price update along with some other hidden aspects, so it actually had some time to be tested by the community before 1.0. I think that the first impression that the community had of Beowulf was that it was slow, clunky, and not fun. This may have led to less testing of the aspect at first, which could have contributed to the fact that the aspect is really out of whack even today. They also had to create new boons for every single cast in the game just for Beowulf, since each one becomes a flare, leading to a need for more intensive testing. The perception is much different now about the aspect, by the way, being considered to be one of the best aspects to speedrun with and just being incredibly powerful in general. Alright, so first off, and probably most importantly, we have Mirage Shot. So this is the duo boon between Artemis and Poseidon, and Mirage Shot is supposed to give you an additional cast hit of 30% for each cast that you have loaded. It also works with all the other aspects as well. But for whatever the reason, Beowulf simply makes the additional hit deal 100% of the first hit instead of 30%. That's right, Mirage Shot literally doubles your cast damage, but only with Beowulf. This works for any cast on Beowulf, but if you want to test it out, I might suggest trying Trippy Flare, since it is also very broken. Trippy Flare actually receives a double palm scaling, meaning that whatever number you see being added by a palm to it actually gets doubled. The boon will still read normally when you look at it, but the damage will be higher in execution. We're not really certain why this one happened, just some kind of oversight is probably our best guess. Now, if you're going to be using Trippy Flare and Mirage Shot, you may want to think twice before you bother going for Artemis boons. For whatever the reason, Trippy Flare in particular will only deal double damage when it crits instead of triple damage like normal, because crits in Hades actually hit for 3 times the damage. But you really have no idea why these things are happening, and this one is especially odd, I thought. There are actually a couple more rumored oddities with Beowulf and Thunder Flare, but I couldn't get it to work in practice. Supposedly, you can get backstabs with it, but I couldn't get it to work, and so either the bug is more convoluted than I thought, or maybe it was even patched out, although honestly that's not very likely at this point. These bugs have existed in Hades for a long time now, and the speedrun community in particular has taken advantage of some of them, so you might be asking, why hasn't Supergiant fixed them? We don't actually know the answer, but it might be safe to say that nerfing an aspect, even for the sake of fixing a bug, so long after the release of a single-player game, might not be what the community actually wants. Sure, it's inconsistent to what the game states, but at least it becomes a net positive for the player. Except that crit thing, that sucks. While on the topic of cast boons, now would be a good time to bring up Hermes Legendary Bad News. This is actually a tough legendary to get for a lot of new players, but it states that only your cast gets additional damage against enemies with no Bloodstones lodged to them, so it's supposed to be very good with something like Hunting Blades or Crystal Beams, you know? But it turns out this is actually a global damage boost, so as long as the enemies don't have a cast stone in them, all of your damage will deal 50% more, and that's actually huge because a passive 50% damage bonus to everything you do is actually really helpful, even if you're not doing much of a cast build. Crush Shot is another cast boon with just a touch of the jank. I'm not going to get into the monstrosity that is Blown Kiss, but one cool tech you can utilize with Crush Shot is hitting enemies that are against a wall in order to deal the damage but not actually lodge the cast. Because of the strange, sort of melee-esque nature of the Crush Shot animation, the game first deals the damage to the enemy in front of you, and then detects if the cast hit a wall or not. If there is a wall behind the enemy, still in range of your Crush Shot, the cast will simply fall to the ground, allowing you to pick it up and cast it again immediately. This works if you're using the Aspect of Error too, allowing you to deal a lot of damage quickly if you line things up just right. Alright, this one's really silly, I gotta say. So, Peer Pressure is a Tier 2 boon from Dionysus that reads as spreading hangover from one enemy to another. When glancing at this boon, you might be thinking what we're all thinking, it sucks. It sucks really bad. The time to spread is just way too high. 4 seconds is a very long time in Hades, and the hangover damage is way too low. But what if I told you that that damage is actually significantly higher than what it states? So from my experiments, the actual damage that will spread is 8 times the number being shown on Peer Pressure. Why? God only knows. It could be this is actually the intended number to be spread, but they forgot to update the actual boon description, or maybe this whole thing is just unintended, which probably seems the most likely. There might be some other conditions going on here that affect the damage as well, because my testing wasn't super consistent. Sadly, even an increase this large doesn't fix the other problems that the boon has, those being the really long time to wait for the spread, and the fact that you can accidentally overwrite the peer pressure stacks with your own weaker hangover stacks. Nevertheless, it's kind of goofy fun to see these surprisingly high hangover damage numbers, I gotta say. If you've been around the block with Hades, you've probably tried or at least heard of the absurd combo that is Cluster Bomb plus Rocket Bomb on the rail. This two-hammer combo can do obscene damage when used at point-blank range, especially with Aspect of Errors. But it actually turns out there's a bug that helps this slightly. You see, Cluster Bomb's supposed to reduce your special damage by 30%, but if you add Rocket Bomb to your arsenal, the damage defaults back to the original 100%, which with Rocket Bomb is a base damage of 80. This works no matter which order you take the hammers as well, which is kind of interesting because I kind of thought that maybe if you took Cluster Bomb second, you might get the reduced damage, but Rocket Bomb second would be okay, but nah, it just turns out it works either way. Alright, this one's pretty interesting, and I'd love to see someone do it much better than I did here. In case you don't know, if you run out of time using Tight Deadline in Hades, you will lose 5 health every second until you're dead, or the timer gets paused. Once you get to 5 health or less, the game will be kind and only reduce you to 1 health in the next second. After that, you can actually continuously escape death by timing your dashes correctly. I noticed that it only seems to work when you're at the 1 health already for whatever the reason. So dashes in Hades are supposed to provide what we call iframes or invincibility frames, meaning that there is a brief window when dashing where you simply cannot take damage. This can be used to avoid attacks altogether, even when well within the animation. Here, it can stop you from dying altogether if you time things just right. I wouldn't call it super useful, since if you actually had to do this continuously while also damaging enemies, it's gonna be really, really hard. And also, as to why it doesn't work unless you're at 1 health, I guess I just really don't know. Alright, this one's really cool, but also incredibly difficult to execute, I gotta say. So the aspect of Rama for the bow allows you to mark enemies with a special and cause them to take additional damage from your attack no matter which enemy you hit. The effect is called Shared Suffering and is definitely very, very powerful, since it allows you to deal crazy amounts of damage to enemies if used well. It just so happens to also be able to do something very unintended, which is bypass bosses' invincibility phases. Normally, when you damage a boss like Lerny enough, the invincibility phase will trigger and prevent you from being able to deal more damage for some time to it. It will also prevent you from eating into the health bar any further than when the invincibility phase is supposed to start. But for some reason, shared suffering damage is excluded from this and is able to chew away more health than intended sometimes. It's actually really hard to utilize, and I spent a really long time trying to get some examples of this, and this is the best I could do. You will need to make it so that the white damage from the attack does not trigger the invincibility, since if it does, then shared suffering damage will not proc, it'll simply be blocked. Ideally, you deal just enough to leave the boss with 1 health before the phase change after hitting it with the white damage, allowing the shared suffering damage to still hit and eat further into the health bar. It might kind of seem like a crazy technique that isn't being utilized that much here, but truth is it's just really, really difficult to set up well. Alright, let's do it. Do it. Alright, this is the last one, but it's definitely a doozy. So companion keepsakes can be used to summon friends from the house in order to deal damage to your foes. One such is Mort from Thanatos. Mort deals 3,500 damage to all enemies in a large circle after a delay. Damage from a companion keepsake does not appear to be intended to be increased from anything, but there are some exceptions to this. Namely, Mort in particular can actually backstab our enemies. That's right, you can increase that 3,500 damage quite a bit by getting additional backstab damage from, say, Athena, and trying to line up enemies so that they are facing away from the center of the circle. It's kind of hard to get a lot of use out of this, since 3,500 damage is already overkill for most bosses, but it sure is fun to see that really big number on Hades. Alright, and that's it. I think these are the most interesting and useful bugs that you can find in the game. And of course, like I said earlier, if you think you found anything in Hades, let me know and I'll be sure to investigate. Just let me know in the comments down below. While you're at it, hit like, hit subscribe. You guys know the deal if you want to get more Hades stuff from me. Alright, thank you so much. Have a great day, and I'll see you later.